Hello everyone, thanks very much for coming to this presentation of the 8 Deadly Maladies of Rapid Experimentation. I'm Dr. Lucas Oberhuber, which means I have no PhD and I'm not a licensed anything, but I have diagnosed a lot of these problems. I work at Simply Business and I'll talk about that in a second. So who is Simply Business? We're an online insurance broker. We have more than 600,000 micro business customers. We cover over 1,000 different types of business, and we're in the US and the UK, and we've really built a very successful business through one disruption. And that disruption is serving customers forgotten by our time-pressed insurance agents. They just haven't gotten great products, and now we've been able to provide that to them. SMEs actually account for 99% of all US and UK businesses. They're very small, but they have a big impact. 1.9 trillion annual revenue in the UK, 8.3 trillion annual revenue in the US, that's in pounds and dollars. But as you can see, it's a very big impact on the overall economy, and serving them, though they are small, is quite a critical thing to do. We're also an award-winning business. We have a culture that's allowed us to win Best Company to Work For in 2015 and 2016, and we were literally the best company. We're now also a certified B Corporation, which means that we are focused on our customers as well as the productivity and profitability of the business, our employees, and also our communities and the environment. So that allows us to play a much broader role, societally positive role. We finally exited to Travelers Insurance in 2017, so went from being a startup to now being part of Travelers Insurance, and that was the biggest insurtech exit that happened to date. And we're really proud of that, and working with Travelers Insurance has been a great experience. Who am I? I'm the Group CTO at Simply Business. I've been here for the last 9 years. I brought in Agile, I brought in continuous integration and continuous delivery, meaning we release our product today, our main service, over 100 times a week, and quite a few other things, customer focus and certainly lean startup. And really in the lean startup area, both developing some of those ideas separately, but then really connecting up with the lean startup movement. I've been doing those techniques for more than a decade. And my current focus is heavily on architecture, on innovation, and on strategy, and any places where those block us, because we have ambitious goals and we expect to grow going forward. What does this talk about? This is about the disorders, the illnesses that I've healed in Simply Business, and that's why I'm the doctor. And to be honest, teams often suffer from more than one of those illnesses, so some of these will have some overlaps, and as you think back and identify teams that you've seen with them, you will often see them suffering from more than one. I have cures, but I do not have vaccines. This is going to be sick. What will I help you with? This is what you're going to get out of this discussion. You'll have an ability to diagnose teams or organizations that are losing their way, and you'll have a language to describe those challenges. So when you use one of these illnesses, you can say, hey, this is what you're suffering from. So you'll both be able to see the symptoms, understand the cures, and understand a name for what is happening. I think all of those things will be really helpful. What you won't get necessarily is how to restructure your organization around innovation, how to make sure that you have an innovation culture that's working. This is more about the diagnosis and trying to solve spot problems. And really based off of Aristotle's famous quote, it is possible to fail in many ways, while to succeed is possible only in one way. I'm going to talk about 8 different maladies. Each one will have a series of components to it. The first is the patient, which is one or more examples of where, in my experience, we saw this happen. Some of the symptoms you should watch out for. A diagnosis, which is really the name of the malady, and I hope you'll enjoy those, and hopefully you'll remember them. Some of the consequences of what happens when those systems go unchecked. Some of the root causes, the emotional angle. So there's actually often a deep emotional reason for why these happen. So even when people see some of these maladies occurring, they may not really feel comfortable addressing them. Finally, some coaching questions and a cure. And that's how I'll go through it. So let's crack on and go straight to the next patient. So in our first case, we tested to see if PayPal would get click-throughs, which it in fact did. But because PayPal is more expensive than our current provider, we would never switch just because people would use it. We didn't have a case for moving to this new place. So what were some of the symptoms? The first one is doing experiments without success criteria or a way forward, everything needing to be statistically significant, and choosing tests based on familiarity with the technique. So you see those experiments, and any one of those really would highlight that you might be in this situation. So what exactly is this horrible disease? It's A/B testostrophy. What are some of the consequences of A/B testostrophy? Well, first of all, time wasted on experiments which don't matter. You often see people experimenting because we should experiment. It's really, really important that we experiment, or maybe the CTO told us to experiment. There's a lack of accountability. When you don't do something important, you also don't have much accountability for it. And finally, while A/B tests are critical for incremental changes, you need more tools in your arsenal. Some things can be tested much more quickly than in an A/B test. An A/B test is quite a heavyweight way to test something. What are some of the root causes? Well, first of all, a fear of damaging something or a lack of courage. This is quite common, right? Fear affects people. I don't want to lose my job because I didn't test this thing and I got it wrong. I don't want to break something and lose my job for that reason. So maybe there's a root lose my job fear in there. Doing what has been asked. My boss told me to do this. We mentioned that before, but that root cause where the brain switched off, I had to do it. Lack of understanding of the goals. If you don't understand what you're trying to achieve, an A/B test might seem really helpful, even though you don't know what you're trying to do. There's an intolerance of failure. This is more of a cultural problem. So your company may not be tolerant of failure. They may be talking about failing fast, but actually, if you run a test and it doesn't work, or you do something and you didn't fully tick all the boxes, you might be in trouble. So let's move on to some coaching questions. The first one is this valuable? Very clear, simple question. Are we moving fast enough? It can be often the case where you're not making decisions fast enough. You're doing A/B tests, but you just don't get to a place. What does success look like? That's probably one of the core questions that many of these will ask you to ask, which is, if I've done what I've done properly, will I know that? Is that success? Will I know what success is? Let's talk about the cures. First of all, decide what you need to learn, then design the experiments. I've seen this over and over again, designing the experiments and then talking about what you want to learn. Do it the other way around. Make teams accountable for results, not experiments. Experiments are a vanity metric. Unless you're doing 0 experiments, then your first step is to start doing experiments. But make your teams accountable for results. Customer behavior before treatment. What I mean here is understand why your customers are doing something before you create a screen or an email or some other thing to tell them what to do. If you're creating treatments, you're basically in a scattershot place where you have no idea why people are doing that, and then you're hoping they react in a way that you don't really know why they're reacting in the first place. And finally, don't test if the cost to test is more than that test is likely to be worth. It just makes no sense. So that's A/B testostrophy. Hopefully that's helpful. We'll move on to the next case. So our patient, we fixed numerous small niggles in the back office for a call center to prove the value of a product team. The product team wanted to prove that they were worth being there. But they kept saying progress would be next quarter. Next quarter will really make progress on our overall goal. In the end, the team's performance was questioned. So we didn't get the result we wanted. So what are the symptoms in this case? First, continuous quick wins to prove we are worth it. This is a key thing here. We've got to do quick wins. We've got to do quick wins. Are we really worth it? And that also leads to marginal metric improvements, and the big change is coming, but not yet. It's coming. Wait for it. So what's the diagnosis here? It's low-hanging fruiteria. So take a minute to digest that. Okay, so what are the consequences of this very unfortunate disease? Well, they're very simple. Low results. And what are some of the root causes? A lack of vision is one of the core root causes here. Fear of not proving value is another. So, well, you invested in me, and I have no way, it's going to take me a long time to show you what's really happening. So I have no vision, why don't we try to prove some value? An expectation of immediate results. This can be coming from your company where people are asking, oh, have you delivered? Have you delivered? What's coming next? What's happened? And if you don't have a way of demonstrating that, you might be tempted to try by doing some low-hanging fruit. So what are some of the coaching questions? Are you making progress? A very simple one. What is that progress? You may say you're making progress, but what concretely progress have you made? And again, what does success look like? All right, so let's talk about the cure. First of all, start with a valuable goal and don't be distracted. This is the critical part of this cure. Do not be distracted by trying to prove value. Have a valuable goal and go for it. And that's low-hanging fruiteria. Let's move on to the next one. Case number 3. So first of all, we A/B tested an improved quote comparison page. We called this toggling. And here's a little demonstration of where that toggling is. So in this case, you can say, oh, how much public liability insurance do I want to have? Then we didn't act on the positive results. The test actually worked. Because people kept questioning, are we sure? Did it really work? Do we trust the results? So what are the symptoms in this case? Few ideas on how to move forward. Nothing different will happen, so don't try. We don't believe there's a change that's possible. And another variant of that is having to prove every step, 1 inch at a time. Results are not accepted. And it's like a court case against a powerful person. You simply can't win. You're simply being pushed all the time. And at the end, major questions are unresolved in spite of much activity. So what's the diagnosis here? It's caged-in syndrome. That's a good one, right? Caged in? Yeah, you got it. All right, so let's talk about some of the consequences of caged-in syndrome. First of all, business questions do not move forward or move at a slow pace. And look, the really significant one is business failure. If you can't find your product market fit, if you can't figure out how you're going to change the world, you're unlikely to have a business. If you can't move on from the way the world is today, you've got a real problem. So what are the root causes here? People with lots of experience in the industry may not want to look bad. It's their field of expertise. It's, you know, the old joke where no one ever got fired for buying IBM. If you're not doing something different, you can't look bad at it. Lack of understanding of what change is needed to get to where you want to get to. If you don't know how to do that change, how can you really drive it forward? Listening to others but not having a point of view. So if you don't know where you want to go, you'll end up listening to lots of different people and change your mind constantly. External pressure. And finally, anchored in the current world rather than the desired future, which is another variant of some of the other things I talked about. So what are some of the coaching questions you can utilize? First of all, you know, using the Lean Startup toolkit, what are your riskiest assumptions? What happens if you're wrong about the way things work? That way you believe the world works doesn't actually work that way. So ask people, what if you're wrong? What if that assumption you have is wrong? And let's talk about the cure for a moment. It's best to decide and negotiate ahead of time the burden of proof, then meet that proof. What this means is the burden of proof may not even be in the team we're talking about. It may be in the management team. It may be external stakeholders. But if you decide ahead of time what is that burden of proof, then when you actually achieve it, you can close out that question. That's really critical. If you do an experiment and you don't have a burden of proof, how do you know that that experiment will actually prove what you want to prove? And, you know, how do you ever close things down? test the riskiest assumptions regardless of sensitivities. It can be very tempting not to go for the hardest, most difficult, most painful one and test something else. But that just means you're delaying the pain. And once proven, questions and learnings are not permitted to be reopened. Unless new information comes in, you must trust your process and believe in the test you're doing, especially if you've negotiated ahead of time, right? That should make that possible. So what I always like to say is you can question the methodology, but you can't question the outcome. So if methodologically we did something wrong, fair enough, change it. But if after that we got the proof we expected, that is the proof. And by the way, this is not a court of law. So when you think about proof, you've got to think about enough for you to make the next decision. It's not like beyond a shadow of doubt or whatever, I don't remember the legal term. But it's enough for us to make a decision. So that's caged-in syndrome. Let's move on to the next one. Case number 4. So our patient, and here we have 2 patients, we needed to speak to insurance partners about our proposition. We kept enhancing and enhancing our PowerPoint deck, but without testing that pitch on those insurance partners, our customers. When we finally reached out, we didn't even use the deck. We never actually presented this very large presentation to anyone. That led to weeks of delay. Let's talk about the next patient. After choosing to improve product for our higher value customers, so we chose that as a business as a priority, we experimented around which segment could be best served by us. So there are a number of different high value customers. So we've got landlords, we've got shopkeepers, we've got tradesmen, any one of them. So those are the types of segments we're talking about here. We kept testing opportunity after opportunity. We couldn't decide which one to go after. The playing field remained wide open. So let's talk about the symptoms. No choices made while more tests are run is the first one. And the second one is continuously asking, is this the best opportunity? Or is this the best opportunity? Is this the best opportunity? So what's the diagnosis? It's the best pox, a very bad disease because it's hard to cure in this way. Well, I do have a cure, to be honest, but what are the consequences? Hunt for the best thing leads to paralysis. Some people have called this analysis paralysis pox or other variants on that. But fundamentally, you're paralyzed by the desire for the best answer. What are some of the root causes? The first one is dipping toes in the water, never jumping in. If you're always just trying to find something, but you're not actually committed, it's very hard to move forward. You'll just be testing. It's easy to go through hundreds, thousands of tests and never do anything. So that's one root cause. Fear of mistakes, we've talked about that before. Questioning of value from senior leadership is one of the big root causes. So is that really good enough? Is it really going to be enough? Is it really going to get us to where we get to? And especially when you're looking at innovation and you're comparing it to your extremely well-oiled machine over here, and you go, oh, the metrics over here are not very good. You run into that questioning of value. That's hard to get away from. So what are some of the coaching questions? Is what you know good enough to move forward? That's a really important one. Do you have enough to move forward, or do you really need more information and data? How will you decide the best path? What are the criteria? How hard will it be to get the answer? This might unveil that it's actually, you're not going to be able to find out what the best answer is. And let's talk about the cure. So first of all, finding the best is hard and expensive. You need to choose good and go for it. In fact, you might have to run out all possible business scenarios in order to know which one was the best. And no one can do that, right? You're not going to be able to run 4 separate businesses in parallel, 3 separate, whatever many, and see which one turned out to be the best. So in reality, it's very hard and expensive to do that. So therefore, you're going to have to choose which opportunity And that will likely be heuristic or gut feel. There is no simple answer. And make the most of that good opportunity, and over time optimize that opportunity. You may find out that opportunity after further testing turns out not to be one, and you put it aside, then you could move on to the next one. So that's the best box. Let's move on to the next case. Case number 5. The team executed a series of experiments. They were always comfortable that those experiments would pan out, with a clear path forward. But the problem was they hadn't solved the tricky problems and had slipped into delivery mode, a much more comfortable place for many. So what are some of the symptoms of this? No emotional highs and lows as difficult truths are learned or overcome. That's one really important symptom. In fact, it's the main symptom. And then let's talk about what the diagnosis is here. It's so easy diseasy. What are some of the consequences of this pernicious disease? So the first point is building something truly new is never easy. Startups are hard. You're changing the world. It won't just flow right into you. If it appears to be easy, something is most likely wrong. Most people describe the feeling of running a startup like riding a roller coaster, and you should expect that. If you're not seeing that, you're probably in It's So Easy Diseasy. So what are some of the root causes? Going to comfort is easy. When we get into something uncomfortable, we might do something we're better at or that we're already good at that's easy. That happens a lot. Lack of time pressure is another way. So if you don't have metered funding and you just have a lengthy runway, well, do the easy stuff. Build the Taj Mahal before you actually need it. You can do, like build the software when you don't even know if someone needs it. All of those can happen. Positivity culture is another thing. So if bad news is punishable, then a tendency to be positive about everything can lead to simply glossing over any problems you hit and just talking about the good sides. So what are some coaching questions? The first one is, what could mess you up? Actively look for problems that could cause you issues. What concrete data do you have that this will work? What would you do to get it? Is there any proof that you're going in the right direction? And let's talk about the cure. So the first one is ensure actual progress on riskiest assumptions, not excessive positivity. You need to see actual progress, measurable progress. Regular pivot, persevere, kill meetings. If you're not having these, how do you know if things aren't working? If you don't have a cadence, it will become a very awkward meeting where you're going, this didn't work. You don't want to get to that position. Insist on strong and improving evidence. If you're not getting that, something's going wrong. That evidence needs to be improving. So that's It's So Easy Diseasy. Let's move on to the next case. Only 2 more to go. No, 2 more to go. So case number 6. No, it's 3 more, sorry. 3 more to go. So first of all, experiments proved a gap in the market. The learnings were not diligently documented. So it didn't stop continued speculation on the existence of whether there were good enough products already in the market. So we saw a gap, we didn't document it, it didn't stop speculation. So what are the symptoms here? The first one, debate is never closed. Another symptom, weak documentation of learning, or it's very hard to find if it's documented. It might be in someone's head only. No one really knows where it is. And then you get yourself in a situation where opinions trump the data. And there's lots of opinions. Everyone's got one, right? Some have more than one. Tests run forever or are poorly designed. And there's a lack of governance. So you might be missing stand-ups, experiment design, documentation standard, pivot, persevere, kill meetings, prioritization, retrospectives, communication. Any of those are a strong sign that something's missing. And no innovation accounting metrics, or those metrics are not up to date. So what's the diagnosis here? What are we calling this? It's no rigor mortis. And what are the consequences of this floppy disease? The First one is, what little progress is made is quickly unraveled as there's no evidence. Learning is stuck in individuals' heads, and the learning is not in priority order. So you might be learning something, but in reality it may not be very important. What are some of the root causes of this floppy one? People on a team fear owning the results. A lot of people talk about missionaries versus mercenaries. And this is one of those cases where if you have a lot of mercenaries, nobody wants to take ownership of making sure it happens. And there's a few reasons why that might be. Lack of leadership is one. No accountability given or requested. It's quite common that you send people off on a mission, but you don't actually make them accountable for the result of that. And or those people don't ask for that accountability. And, for example, with too many non-dedicated team members, it's easy to get no one being responsible for the outcomes. So let's ask some coaching questions. Where can I see what you've learned? A really simple one. A team that's suffering from this disease is going to struggle to answer that one. Oh, well, it's over there. It's in Bob's head. It's over. You won't know. When did you last finish an experiment? If that's been more than 2 weeks, how quickly are you learning? If there's been no experiments, even worse. If the answer is don't know, another good sign. Do you have the resources to succeed? If you've got non-dedicated people, that might be the problem. Let's talk about the cure. So the thing I recommend the most is a bi-weekly cadence. You can choose the cadence, but bi-weekly I think is a really strong one, in which riskiest assumptions are reduced. Failure to make progress is a pivot situation. Give the accountability. If you don't make progress, maybe you have to pivot. Track governance carefully. This may be the only way to know if a team is making progress if you're using innovation accounting. Otherwise, a good team or a bad team could look the same. And frankly, if needed, you need to look at team capability. Your riskiest assumption may be your team's ability to actually experiment. Or to actually learn, probably. Let's focus on learning rather than experimenting. So we spent a year researching the most valuable way to serve our high-value customers. We talked about the high-value customers before. This was actually a different period of time, ironically. It led to us not choosing a way forward. We always had more tests and more tests to run, none landing the killer conclusion. And we kept asking, is this actually an opportunity? Do we really have an opportunity to serve our high-value customers? So what are the symptoms? Understanding from first principles, i.e. we know nothing. Actually, most of the time we do know quite a lot. So if you're having to start from the very beginning, you've got a problem. Many tests, few results. So again, a bit of the experiments we were doing didn't actually matter. No courage or conviction. Few sharp puzzle pieces, but no overall picture. When you think about what we're trying to experiment, we're trying to get a fuzzy picture of where we're headed, not lots of tiny little puzzle pieces we don't know where they fit in. If you're doing lots of targeted, very small experiments, and those are just puzzle pieces, you're not getting that overall picture. So what's the diagnosis? Well, it's boil the oceanoma, a very deadly disease. And what are the consequences of this? Lots of time passes and the team is on the verge of moving forward, but then one more test. I just need one more test to be sure. What are some of the root causes? The first one is fear of making a call. It's that same old fear. We've seen fear in a number of these. Fear of making a call is a big one here. We must know everything to decide what to do, right? I can't make that call without knowing it all. I must be fully knowledgeable. And therefore, I'm waiting for the spreadsheet to give me the answer. The spreadsheet never gives the answer. These are uncertainties. We haven't gotten to the end of the process. We haven't built the business. We haven't gotten the result. The spreadsheet won't tell us. So what are some coaching questions? What progress have you made in the last 2 weeks? Similar to the no rigor mortis. If you had to, what would you build right now? I think this is a really good one. If you ask a team, your funding just ran out. Unless you build something now, it's all over. What would you build? That could be really powerful. What are the riskiest assumptions still to be identified? Have you actually identified all the risky assumptions? Are you actually closing those down? What are the ones that are still to be identified? And let's talk about the cure. So the first one is make small iterative steps in the right direction rather than giant leaps. There's a real tendency to want to leap all the way in one go. You've got to be small and iterative while building to that big place you're trying to get to. Track the reduction or change in riskiest assumptions carefully. The no rigor mortis is the disease that will let you not do this. Expect changes on the order of weeks, not months or years. You really should be expecting these teams to create results all the time and get that increasing strength of evidence. It's really, really critical. And if you think about it, between low-hanging fruiteria and boil the oceanoma are the sort of two extremes of directions where you can avoid heading to where you want to. And what you want is somewhere in the middle. So that's boil the oceanoma. Let's move on to our last case, case number 8. So we have 2 patients here. We launched a new product for commercial landlords. They're one of our segments. Before it had traction, we pulled the funding because we actually had higher short-term value opportunities, things that mattered more to us as a business that week, that month. And because we pulled the funding, that product never reached our target performance metrics. It underperformed continuously. Let's look at the second patient. The board provided money to investigate a new market for us to open up in. But it was unclear what a positive result would be for the board. If we got a positive result on that investigation, what would the board do? When asked, the answer was, nothing would convince us to move forward. We gave the money back. So what are the symptoms? Even if the experiment is a success, there are no resources to follow up on the success. You know, I talked a bit about dipping your toe in the water, never jumping in. This is another way to dip your toe in the water and never jump in. And the second symptom, funding gets pulled early. So there is funding, but then it gets pulled. So what's the diagnosis here? This is investophobia. And what are the consequences? Experiments literally have no value because they won't ever be done, right? It's that learning, that thing you learn, goes nowhere. So what are the root causes here? Leadership was never committed to the project in the first place. People expect the numbers to look good right away, and there are no innovation metrics to replace that. So you're using the same exact metrics on your baby fledgling project as you do on your highly oiled, long-standing business. Let's talk about some coaching questions. How important is this to the business? If it's not important to the business, why do it in the first place? Get that commitment up front. So what's the cure? This is not a go, no-go situation. So once you've done your experiment, you should not be in a go, no-go situation. Funding should be ring-fenced for that project when the opportunity is proven, right? So make sure the funding's in place before you start is the simple answer to that. Get that commitment up front. That's investophobia. All right, let's bury this. So first question you might be thinking, if Simply Business is this bad, you've made all these horrible mistakes, how did we do so well? How is it possible that this worked out for us? So I want to talk a bit about that. So the first one is we identified and then cured these painful diseases. We didn't just let them happen. We learned from the fact that we were making these mistakes and improved on them. The second one is we're never satisfied. We're quite self-critical. And by the way, there's a dichotomy between being critical of yourself and just being super pessimistic. And the point is, you've got to be optimistic about what's possible for the future while being able to improve. And that can be very difficult to span between those two poles, right? How can you be self-critical but still really pleased with where you've gotten to? And I guess the best way to think about it is you've won the Super Bowl, now you want to win the Super Bowl next year. Or you've won the Premier League if you're in the UK, Now you want to win the Premier League next year. Your sports teams have to get themselves motivated after every win to improve for the next one, and we're no different. Our culture is about learning and being a great place for the right kind of people. So making sure you've got the right people in place that will then want to be there is hugely important here. All right, let's talk about things to remember for your teams. So first of all, you've heard about all the maladies, but it really is all about the people and the team. The more entrepreneurial, the better. Have the right people, train them in the right way, make sure they're behaving in ways that get you in the right place, make sure you're as a company. Fear of messing up is powerful. Courage is absolutely required. Look for that courage. Look for that courage, which obviously needs to be paired with judgment. The courage is not just foolhardiness, it's courage and judgment. Having a culture that allows this and a culture of experimentation is crucial. If you pretend it, if you fake it, it's simply not going to work. You need to mean it. You need to want to experiment because it will look like wasted money otherwise. If you're simply doing it for the sake of appearances, it's not going to work. You must be ready to invest in ambiguity. There will be no certainties. You cannot just go, I don't know what this is. It's not going to work. You have to be willing to invest in ambiguity. And finally, good and bad experimentation can be hard to tease apart. I've given you some maladies that provide strong early signals that you're doing bad experimentation. Use those to identify whether you're actually doing well. But if you're waiting a year to see whether a team has created results, at the end of that, it's unlikely that you got a result if there's been nothing in the middle. And by the way, what generally happens is in the middle of that year, someone goes, okay, here's your revenue targets, which are probably not the right thing to solve the problem. But people realize nothing's happening, and they start to go back to sort of old standing ways of doing things. All right, so some takeaways. These are, on this slide and the next slide, I'll talk through all of the maladies I've talked to before. So A/B testostrophy is really about do tests that matter. Low-hanging fruiteria is about stop trying to prove you're worth it, do what's important. Start with the most critical things, do those first. Cage-in syndrome is about, in order to succeed, you're going to have to modify the nature of the world. You can't just stay with the status quo and expect yourself to build a business. The best pox is about picking a good opportunity because finding the best will take you too long. You will never get there. It's so easy to easy is about how innovation is a roller coaster and you should be seeing that. No rigor mortis is about making sure you measure progress on a bi-weekly basis. Boil the oceanoma, small iterations towards your big goal. You can see those iterations happening. If you're not seeing them, you're not really heading towards your big goal. And investophobia, without funding, don't bother with a test. And that's it. This is me. This presentation, you can find it on Speaker Deck, either by searching my name or by following this link. And thank you very, very much.